Well, if you found yourself a little disappointed in recent years with what's happened to heroes in many cases, on film and in books, you're not alone, and we're going to unpack that a little bit here today with just the right man for the job. I'll be right back. Well, hello there, friends. I'm Mike Creavey, host of the Gracious Guest Show. Happy and delighted that you've joined us today to take a look at faith and culture. We're going to look at story today, the importance of good storytelling, and the challenge sometimes of really knowing what constitutes a good story. Sometimes we know what we don't like. Sometimes we know what doesn't seem to work, doesn't seem to resonate with us, but we don't really know how to give that expression in a kind of a clear way. What is it that we do look for? What does strike us? What works? And why is that? These are some of the things we're going to look at today. Before we do that, please make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video, share it far and wide. I am delighted to be joined once again by my friend Thomas Salerno, who is here with us to talk about this question of really what is a hero in a lot of different venues, but we're going to look at film and some literature. Thomas has been on the program a few times before. He's one of my favorite people to talk to. We've talked about a whole episode on Ray Bradbury. We've talked before about dinosaurs, the works of Tolkien. So go back and check out previous videos that Thomas has shared with us, or interviews that he shared with us. Thomas Salerno is a Catholic children's book author, freelance writer, podcaster, and history educator. His writing has been featured on sites such as Word on Fire, Busted Halo, and Voyage Comics. He also maintains a Substack newsletter called Page Turning, where he shares the latest highlights from his writing and podcasting adventures, which I highly recommend you check out. The link's below. So without further ado, what is a hero with Thomas Salerno? Let's get right to it. Thomas Salerno's back on the Gracious Guest Show. How you doing?
Mike, I am doing great. It's good to be back.
You might appreciate this. So at the time of this recording, we're on the doorstep of October, and I think it's coming out in October, and so people are no doubt surrounded one way or the other by all this kind of Halloween imagery and that macabre kind of atmosphere. And in the midst of that, my wife, for the first time, is reading. Well, she's listened to, I guess, a really good audiobook version, which I haven't listened to, of Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Ooh.
So she's never read it before. And as she's talking about it, I haven't read it in years. And I'm like, I think it shows the staying power of Bradbury, that it's like, I'm like, oh, did you get to this part and this part? And I'm asking her all this stuff. So
that's funny
that's
because
that's a little pitch for our Bradbury interview from a few years ago.
I've been holding off on that one because I thought it would scare me, but I'm probably going to read it this October. Yeah, I'm planning to.
And the thing is, the only thing I'll sort of ruin that's a spoiler, not exactly, it's like a reverse spoiler or an unspoiler. When I was a kid, I was like really affected, I think, in a negative way by there was a movie version of it with Jonathan Pryce, it's a great depiction of it. Really well made. Bradbury wanted to make it into a movie for years and it just never worked until like the early 80s, I think. So I grew up watching that movie, and there's a scene in the movie that features like way too many tarantulas. And and it's the 80s, so it's not, like there might be some visual trickery there, but it's like they're real tarantulas. And it's like and so the whole way through reading the book, then when I was in my mid-30s, I'm reading the book and I'm waiting every page. I'm waiting for that scene, not in the book. Completely just added to the movie. And I was like,
spoiler. Yeah.
I was like, thanks a lot. Like, not that I wanted it in the book, but like, why did you put it in the movie? Like, it gave me arachnophobia, I think, as a kid. But anyway. So, but here today, like this, so just backdrop for anyone watching, if anyone's still watching at this point. No, this was just funny because this has been like these seemingly unrelated strands that have been kind of in the back of my mind, and they started to kind of coalesce around this idea of heroism largely in movies, but also in some maybe written fiction. And then I reached out to you because I basically was right up till almost hitting record here, kind of thinking like, I don't really know what we're talking about, but I think we'll find out by talking about it. So, I had originally, I think I'm just, titling it something about, heroes or what is a hero. But my original working title was Stop Undermining My Heroes. So let me just share real quick, by a little bit of context here without too much detail. And I'll bring some of more of it later for what kind of led to this, and then just kick it over to you to sort of see your initial thoughts. But so for me, it's been this largely, like I said, film or most of my examples. This thing I've been noticing but can't put my finger on for many, many years. I feel like at this point of very often like hero characters from when I was a kid that are somehow revisited more recently in all this anticipation of, oh, so and so's returning to the screen, only to have them be, what have you done to my beloved? And a couple examples, and again, there's a million different sort of people's takes on this, but just very generally, I think we got a lot of, it's fair to say in the last few years, a lot of frustration, right, among different fan bases for the way like Luke Skywalker was handled, right, in The Last Jedi.
Right.
Han Solo, even to some degree, maybe a lesser degree, but still, his the handling of his character in The Force Awakens before that. So a lot of Star Wars references, even Yoda more and more, like by extension, like from, I think starting with the prequels, like
Mm-hmm.
how incompetent was he? This character I thought was all wise. And then certainly like in The Acolyte with just even the brief shot of him at the end of like, oh, by the way, he knew about all this too, which was kind of raising some eyebrows. But I think the note I had sent to you basically said, and there's others, but just to save time here, I put down, in various ways, all of these characters have had something of the following pattern imposed on them in recent years: old, dilapidated, out of touch, character regression or dematuring. I want to come back to that one, see
Mm-hmm.
what you think about that. From a writing or storytelling standpoint, unreliability, deception, irrelevance, unraveling of a cherished / beloved / strong and confident masculine character. Um, Unmade before my eyes on screen. That was kind of how I like a deconstructionist kind of bent. So this is kind of
Deconstruction, yeah.
so that's it started off with this random like what am I looking at, and there is some positive stuff I think I want to get to, but let me just get your take on just maybe those examples or some others. Like, have you noticed something similar? How have you been sort of receiving some of these things, or been your take on it?
I think definitely Star Wars The Acolyte was where I had just had it with this trend. I guess
I feel like that's a hinge moment for a lot of people, and
yeah,
we're going to see with time. But
yeah, I had kind of been tolerating it, I suppose, and I do believe The Acolyte started out with a lot of promise.
yeah,
Those first few
yeah,
episodes, I was hooked. But once you
mm-hmm.
realize the whole point of the show is to deconstruct the Jedi Order and to deconstruct heroism in
Yeah,
general, and to kind of show things from the Sith perspective, like provide the Sith critique of the Jedi without offering a counter argument from the
right.
Jedi's point of view,
It's
really.
like if the Sith made a Star Wars show for
Right.
for Disney, but didn't
Exactly.
want you
Yeah.
to know they made it, they couldn't have done a
Exactly.
better
Yeah.
job.
I just felt that I'm like, okay, I'm tired of this sort of deconstructionism. I get it has its place in storytelling, but I just felt that, and I believe I said this on Secrets of Star Wars, that the the makers of The Acolyte did not seem to understand that Star Wars is a fairy tale set in outer space.
Yeah,
It looks like sci-fi, but what it really
right,
is a fairy tale in outer space. And fairy tales have certain conventions. And when you
right.
begin to violate those conventions, it goes awry. It doesn't land,
Yeah, that's a good point.
and yeah, and also like what you hinted at with kind of the deconstruction not only of heroism but of masculinity in general, or the deconstruction of characters. Now, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit on character
Yeah.
regression, because I
Okay.
think there can be a place for that, because real life is not a straight line progression of you
Sure.
get better and better and better and better. You go through seasons of your life where you can regress maybe to or
Right.
fall back. And so in especially in more realistic fiction, I feel that definitely has its place. The question is, why are you employing
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Well,
Why
and
are
actually,
you employing it?
I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up because, like, let me to clarify a little bit. Because it is for me, it's kind of complicated because, like, so I wanted to get that out there, but like, kind of tweak it a little. because it's not, I don't think it's fair to say that my position is entirely negative against like Last Jedi. Like, I hate Last Jedi.
Hmm.
No, it's not that easy. And,
Right.
or Dial of Destiny, Indiana Jones for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think, where I struggle a little bit is, and not pretending like I have the answer. It's more like a question where like,
Right.
why is it, for example, that like, so when they first started advertising Last Jedi, and early on there were I forget exactly how it rolled out, but I'm always following like the feeds and stuff, and like I was deep into the what ifs, and
Watching
so
trailers over and over.
yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so early on, like not so much spoilers, but early on, like it wasn't super disguised that they were going to do something different with Luke,
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I hadn't read, and I think you have probably more than me, but I had read some of like the expanded universe as a kid, like in some of the games certainly where he shows up. And so the in the consciousness, I think of those of us, you included, right?
Hmm.
The late '80s, mid to late '80s kids growing up. It's like we had all this time to sort of imagine, which
Right.
we weren't official, right? But like it's like one big sandbox in our minds. Like, what do you do with Luke now? And I think that's interesting because what's the instinct, right? And I feel like the creative, imaginative instinct of a kid growing up with Luke in your head is maybe for some that he's perfect, and I think that would be a mistake. But even in some of the novels and stuff, like you see him facing ongoing challenges, you see him maybe brought down again, but like this idea of somewhere in there he has made a fundamental choice that he's never going back on.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but by the same token, when they started floating the idea of like a Luke that had kind of fallen away a little bit, at first I really liked the idea, and I used it as a I used it as, of course, as a ministry pivot, where I was basically like, I
Ah.
like this idea because I don't believe in once saved always saved.
Uh-huh. Right.
And so I
Hmm.
think there is even from a Catholic perspective, a tremendously um, helpful, or not helpful. There's a real opportunity there to explore the nature of the ongoing cross we bear, right?
Uh-huh.
But I don't know. I just felt like, seeing him on screen, he's so disappointing. Like he's like completely given up. It's like he's lost everything. And I think they try
Right.
to restore that, of course, by the end. But I don't know. Part of me thought if he hadn't died at the end of 8, maybe, like maybe if they'd carried him into 9 and we had a little more screen time to actually see this,
The
this
comeback.
returned Luke,
Yeah.
maybe that would have done it. I don't know. So I'm not just trying to, sharpshoot, but those are just some thoughts, like, was it just executed a little bit clunky? And I don't know.
I I was another one of those people who was on board with the idea that Luke had kind of lost his way in the sense, and I'm like, because he has to carry the burden, the entire burden of the Jedi on his shoulders, and that's
Right.
a lot, But I would agree in the sense that the way they executed this, we didn't have any build up to that. It's just plopped down in front of you,
Yeah.
and you've just got to accept it, and
30 years of a gap, and
thir-
now they're trying to fill it in, and a lot of the extra stuff is helpful.
Mhm.
A lot of the lore is good, but yeah.
I just think people, I have this thing where I can like imagine in my mind adventures that we haven't seen
Yes.
in
Yep.
media, where I'm always like backfilling. Like if something like that sudden comes up, I can backfill and say, "Oh wow, there's this whole thing that we haven't seen of him getting to this point."
Yeah.
But that's just me. I think other people can't do that or don't,
Sure.
and so it's seen as like very abrupt, and the whole
Yeah.
cliche of you're ruining my childhood and stuff, and like, so
Well,
but
and
yeah,
I
I
feel
felt
like,
that. No, go ahead.
oh, no, I forget which justice. This is a bizarre example to use, but which chief justice I think, or there was some legal, there was a judge at some point who was famously, they were working out some sort of decency case, and the question was of like what constitutes pornography, and he said
Yes.
something to the effect of, "I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I
When you
see
see
it."
it.
It's like this kind of,
Right.
and I feel like, so I'm not a George R. R. Martin fan, or like I'm not broad. I know
Yeah.
what,
Neither am I.
I know
Yeah.
what the whole thing is, the phenomenon of Game of Thrones, but I've never been interested in it per se. I'm a I'm a big Tolkien Lord of the Rings guy, and I thought it was interesting though. There's a clip floating out there where Martin kind of criticizes, like he basically sort of tips his hat to Tolkien, is like, yeah, Lord of the Rings is great, and you have the end and all that, everything's going great, but then but what is Aragorn's tax policy? What is and he starts going down this list, and he means it, like he's serious about how like
Yeah.
for him it's not enough, like you have to go, and I'm just laughing because I'm like fundamentally disagree, just flat out. I couldn't care less about Aragorn's tax policy.
It's interesting
I
because
feel like there's something there where it's like, heroism. Aragorn's he's a flawed character as well, but like, where is that? Like, where do we cross the line? Maybe in fantasy, maybe it's a genre thing of
because
like,
I've been wrestling with this myself.
Yeah,
because one of the most fascinating questions for me as a creative person is that, okay, well, now what? What
Yes.
happens? And so
Yeah.
I look at something like the ending of Lord of the Rings, specifically of Aragorn's story arc, and my big question became, what's his kid gonna be like?
Yeah.
Because that kid is gonna carry on his shoulders the entire burden of like, okay, your father essentially saved the world or helped
Yeah.
save it, and now is high king of men and stuff like that. And so like you're carrying the expectations of other people, the expectations of
Yes.
yourself, even if no one is explicitly telling you don't measure up, you're going to feel it. And so that is not so much what happens to Aragorn, but I wonder about the people who come after him.
Yeah.
And so I think in Martin's case, yeah, he's asking the wrong questions. And what Aragorn's tax policy is not an interesting question. It needs to be about characters. Characters are interesting people. Those are interesting questions.
And Monsignor Lorenzo Albacetti, who was from your neck of the woods, I think, a great Catholic priest. He passed away some years ago, but he was I think he was one of the founders of the Communion Liberation, I want to say, and he was a dear friend of John Paul II. And there's a documentary I like to show every year to my students, and in that documentary, he's just one of the people that they occasionally pop in there with like little observations and such. And he makes a really powerful statement at one point where he says, I never bother asking, what is the meaning of life, or what is it, he goes these sorts of questions. He goes, to me, the most important question of all is, who are you? And to me, so like, I'm the kind of guy who, when I'm watching, for example, like Lord of the Rings, like the movies, and the way that you see when in the beginning of Return of the King, I was just watching this the other day, when Arwen and the other elves are like journeying through the woods, they're on their way to the sea, they're going to leave, and she's been told by Elrond, that there's no future for her, right? That's all death.
Right.
And then she sees that vision, right? The vision of, hey, oh, by the way, there would be a son, and that changes everything for her, that it's all worth it for that. That clip, maybe I'm just a sap, I don't know, but the clip of seeing, like, as you're watching the movies and the way the pace of the movies go, like, you still believe it's going to have a happy ending, but it's hard to imagine it,
Right.
And you see that little clip of like Aragorn with the silvery hair, the venerable, like like scripture talks about that, right? The blessing of like the gray hair, right? That you've been through this, you have these stories to tell, you are a venerable old man kind of thing. And the respect that scripture pays to fatherhood, when there's so many bad fathers in scripture that it doesn't hide, and so you see him and he picks up his son and they're spinning around. Like, I tear up just thinking about it. And it makes me think about, like, it's like I can imagine being there. I can imagine being Aragorn. And it's like the last thing in the world on my mind, not that it doesn't matter, is tax policy. Or like, how was the harvest? Those things matter, but it's just something about that, like, who he is. That's who he is, and that's his son.
He is.
And that's,
yeah.
and it's just
the world today.
Is that hard to write? If you're not.
I think it is, because especially because of the cultural milieu we're in.
Yeah.
And also just because,
which is very sad, and I get it. Yeah.
And because we're all fallen people, and those paragons that we often look up to or visualize, like, are so thin on the ground, seemingly. I think it can be difficult to write convincingly today.
Yeah.
And everyone's just expecting the giant to have feet of clay,
right?
And so I just think that people set their expectations too low. Everybody does this. I do this. And
Mm-hmm.
so we get into mediocrity because we set our not only for ourselves but for other people, because we set our bar just so low, and
Yeah.
I really think too that there's this kind of sickness in society where okay, like you said, like scripture, tons of bad father-son relationships, and
Yeah.
the Old Testament is littered with them. Probably the most moving is David and Absalom,
Yeah.
though.
Oh my gosh.
That moment where Absalom is killed and David's men rejoice, and David has a
Yeah.
breakdown.
I'm writing about that. I'm still working. I've told you before. I
Yeah.
can't. I keep redoing it because it's just not quite right yet.
It makes me tear up whenever I read, because the scripture portrays the raw emotion of a guy who's lost his son, a son who betrayed him.
Yeah.
And who tried to unseat him. Yeah.
I think that's the key. It would be totally like, oh yeah, I get it. Whatever. Like, his perfect little angel son passes away, and that would be heartbreaking. But there's something special about like the power of the love.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just, I can't help it. I don't care what he's done. I would let him kill me before I would see any harm come to him.
Right. Yeah. And that represents. I think that it's funny. My mother and I were talking about this the other day, that in that moment, David becomes the man that God describes as a man after my own heart, because God would do that. Yeah. He would die in your place, and did.
Yeah.
So
Han Solo. Let's see, I think it's done. I see a lot of people, they killed off Han. I've always, it hurts to see, and it's not maybe what I would have picked, but when he touches his face, like, even like, I'm dead, like, I am dying, you have killed me, but you're still like that.
You're my son,
like, oh God, which, by the way, funny side note, I think I mentioned this to you before, the very first movie my daughter ever saw, like, she couldn't see it because she was like 2 days old, but like, I sometimes get nervous that like that movie was now available widely right when Noelle was born. So like, I have all these memories of like going to sleep on the couch, trying to hold her, like, and everything. And like the Star Wars with the patricide scene in it. I've always been like, and sure enough, like when she first started getting a little, like, thinking Star Wars was cool, and like we had lightsabers out one day and she picks the Kylo Ren one, I'm like, no, that one, or pick the Yoda one. Like, you can't, like, not cool. But no, that's what I want to ask you, maybe explore a little bit here, this so, well, just to put you on the spot, like, how would you, Thomas, as a avid reader and a fan of film, and just like, how would you describe a hero, not to make this like as blunt as like a Matt Walsh, like, what is a woman kind of thing, but like, what is a hero? I mean, it's a good question, and I don't think we think about it a lot.
And I've been thinking about it a lot as I try to stretch my muscles creatively. I think a hero is someone who is willing to give of themselves to the uttermost end. I think Christ himself has the greatest definition of a hero, that greater love hath no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. And or even, and Jesus does this, for his enemies.
Yes.
While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, Paul says. So it's like,
right.
I feel that the hero is someone who is willing to give of themselves and of their very life so totally, to the uttermost extent, who is willing to do the tough thing, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't bring recognition, choose the lowest place, because there's a lot of heroes who don't get recognized. People who are genuinely heroic, doing genuinely heroic things, but the world is not putting them up on a pedestal. But that doesn't matter. They're just going to keep doing, like, raising a family, doing the heroic thing, even if they never get any attention whatsoever. Because sometimes I think we can fall too into sort of the childish definition of a hero, which is that the hero kills all the bad guys, the end, like the kind of, and Robert E. Howard, I love his stories to death, but like Conan the
I'm not really.
Barbarian,
Oh yeah,
Conan
yeah,
the
yeah.
Barbarian
Oh, yeah.
is not an exemplary hero, in my mind. Great adventure stories, and to a
Sure.
certain extent, he is being heroic in the sense that he is slaying monsters and saving people, but he's often doing it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
And so
Well, and
like,
I think there's like a little bit of a one-dimensional, like, so I was just doing an etymology, because in one sense, like sometimes the Greek word heros, where we get heroes from, can mean like, demigod, and like, I mean, Hercules, right? And I guess, from that sense, it's like just maybe the blunt fact of like, here's someone who is just beyond us. They're not a god, but like, oh, I could never be that guy. But I think it does, like, we get more of this fuller, I think we're more satisfied by a fuller sense of like, I mean, how many of us have, grandma, a neighbor, a teacher, who you wouldn't hesitate to say that person is a hero. Like,
right.
absolutely, forget Superman, forget whoever, like, this person's really, like, Mrs. Miller's real,
Right. Oh, there's a great
Yeah.
comic book panel that came out after 9/11 of Superman in costume looking up at a giant mural of firefighters, policemen, EMT, soldiers, all these people, and there's just a little speech. It's him and Crypto, Superdog, there
Yeah.
looking up at this mural, and there's a tiny little speech balloon above Soup's head, and it just says, "Wow." Wow.
That's great.
Like these,
Yeah.
even Superman recognizes these are the heroic people, the ordinary people
Yeah.
who would run into those towers knowing they're going to die.
Do you think? Well, it's interesting because I feel like what you're saying. It makes the word selflessness is really coming to mind.
Yeah.
Because so for like Luke, back to Luke for example, like Luke, like you get it, like you're my nephew of all, and but when does he start to go off track? Like with, I think in some ways his deterioration, there's at least an element of it that's like, my nephew of all people, right?
Right.
So it's I want, and they don't quite bring it up maybe that bluntly, but that's what I get off it, a little bit of like, well, it could be anybody, and by the end you see him not in a dismissive way, but like my two favorite little things where it's like, you don't really get the impression that he's totally actually given up hope on Ben, but he's not letting that be his driving thing anymore. Like he's more committed to the big picture. And I love my two favorite in Last Jedi is when, he's talking very sincerely to Leia and he says, but I can't save him, and the idea that like, he's not saying he can't be saved. He's saying, I can't save him. Like it's not up to me.
Right.
I love that line. And then I love, there's something just cool about like when he goes to face him, and like Kylo's like, have you come to save my soul? And he's like,
Right.
No. He's just like, that's not what I'm here for. He's like, I'm done with that crap. Let's do this. Like, there's a bigger picture here. And I feel like the selflessness thing, let me kind of redirect it back to you here. Are there any things in particular you think are good, like common thing, like when you think of like Aragorn, or you think of Superman or Batman, like all these sort of seemingly unconnected characters, what are some common elements that you see, or examples of like that selflessness, or how does that play out?
Yeah. Part of it is what you were just saying about putting the big picture over self. We are in such an individualistic age that like the very idea of, and it's in The Last Jedi, live free, don't join. Right? That's what's the worst character in Star Wars says that. Live free, don't join. And I'm like, that is not only the antithesis of Star Wars, it's something is rotten in the heart of Denmark, as Shakespeare says. That is the thing that is rotting our society from within. The idea that like, I don't have to commit to something bigger than myself and my own interests. But the hero does, whether it's family, community, nation, faith, and I know people have their opinions about the Rings of Power, but the way they are portraying Aragorn's ancestor Elendil in this show is just magnificent, because he's a hero. And he has a lot of Thomas More in him, because he's a guy who's basically saying with Thomas More, I am the king's good servant, but God's first.
God's first.
You
Yeah.
know, and he's
Yeah.
willing to accept imprisonment. He's willing to
Yeah.
accept exile or execution, because he will not budge on what's right. And he's even willing to sacrifice his family. There's a scene where Elendil and his daughter, who's a character who they created for the show, have this moment when he's in prison, and all I could think of was, because she accuses him, basically of not caring about her or the family, and it's like,
Yeah.
Christ says, if you hate not mother or father, children,
Yeah.
for my sake,
For my
you
sake,
cannot
yeah.
be my disciple. And we obviously don't. That's what they call Semitic hyperbole.
Yes.
There,
yes.
but you don't literally hate them. But in other words, if you are not willing to let those things go,
Yeah.
for service to a higher cause, and some people just can't let go of themselves for service to anything.
Right.
So I feel that is I don't know if I answered the question, but I think that willingness to surrender self for a higher purpose or a higher good is really what defines the hero, and I think is lost nowadays.
I think there's a a particular sort of flavor maybe of endurance and perseverance that goes with it. That's not just like you're the toughest guy in the room just because you've done the most push-ups or something like that, but like
Yeah.
an endurance even to your own maybe detriment or embarrassment for the sake of something that you really, really think is the right thing for your people, And an
Yeah.
example of this I was thinking of, and I think at least last we spoke, I'm sort of putting you on the spot with this, or maybe putting you at a disadvantage. You have not seen Top Gun 2, is that correct?
No, I
Is that
haven't
okay?
seen it yet.
So not a whole lot of details here, but see this, in our sort of back and forth with the emails, for the viewers and listeners, what jumped to my mind was like this, like I said before, this sometimes like inexplicable, like just, I just don't feel like this is right. Like this makes me mad, and maybe I don't know why, or it's disappointing, and in recent years, I cannot think of any example that is more sort of like, a better candidate for like first place in the opposite kind of sort of category of when I just felt like it was done so right as with Top Gun 2. And so I've been thinking about that lately, and there's just a few things I'd mentioned that are interesting because, the first Top Gun is so, iconic in so many ways. I had never seen it, honestly, before the second one came out. Like all my friends, like the army, like military community, everybody, oh, Top Gun, Top Gun. I'm like, I'd seen clips of it. I was never that interested in it.
I've just seen the music video, Danger Zone.
Yeah, right. And it's so iconic, and the music, like Kenny Loggins and all this kind of stuff, and it's just like, okay, I got it. But when you watch it, what's interesting is, when you watch the movie, his character, he's just a kid practically when it came out. He was like late 20s or whatever. And what's interesting to me is, his characters, it's fun. There's a lot, there's growth within that movie for his character. But it's a very like immature 80s kind of like, grown adolescent boy kind of thing. And what amazed me was I made it a point to watch the original before I went to the sequel.
Right.
And when I went to the sequel, like with the original so fresh in my memory, maybe that helped. But I just, from beginning to end of that movie, first of all, it's a phenomenal movie. It's really well made. But his character just feels right. He is absolutely himself, but he's clearly grown. He's matured, he's developed. He's not Superman, and he's getting older, right? And there's this whole like fun thing to the movie, like the new generation, and that's a common motif, right? Like the next generation. But it didn't decimate him. It didn't break him down. It didn't mock and ridicule him.
I'm getting the sense that it didn't need to demolish him to build up the next generation.
Right. Like he's not like, like gassy in the cockpit because he's in his, like it's just like these tropes, he's still like, he goes out to train them and they're all hot shots and he has to, train them for this mission. And the very first time they go out, they're all like, oh, old man. And he mops the floor with every last one of them. And then they're like, oh, dude, okay, wow. Like this guy still got it, And so like throughout the movie, there's this like respect for what's come before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking like, in my silly mind, I'm thinking like Chesterton and orthodoxy and like the democracy of the dead and
The
respect
democracy of
for,
the dead. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Have
right?
you seen
I'll stop there
Masters of
for a
the Air?
second.
Yeah. Have you seen Masters of the Air?
No, I don't think so.
So Masters of the Air is on Apple TV Plus. It is made by the same people who made Band of Brothers and The Pacific.
Oh, really?
And
Wow.
I have not seen a better representation of that democracy of the dead
Is this
idea.
the new one? Austin Butler and like Callum Turner? Yeah, the
Yeah.
new war drama miniseries.
Right, yeah.
Based on
About the
100th
bomber
group.
pilots. Yeah, the 100th
Yes,
bomber
okay.
group. That show
Okay.
has nothing of these modern problems in it.
Yeah.
And
wow.
my brother and I were shocked because we kept
Right.
expecting it to come up.
You
kept
expect it, right?
We expect it. And at the end of that show, we looked at each other and says, this is the most remarkable television show to come out in 20 years. We're like this because
Yeah.
and it also doesn't shy away from the morally problematic elements of what they're being what they're being ordered to do.
Absolutely.
But despite grappling with that, it in no way diminishes the heroism of these men, the personal courage of these men. And these are men who are willing to die on these missions of insanely impossible odds.
Yeah.
Like I did not understand the breadth of how impossible to survive these bombing, but to survive 25 missions and get home, and just the idea of like they're willing to sacrifice for their buddies, for their country, knowing that they're probably not going to make it back. These are real people. Forget fantasy, forget sci-fi. These are real people who existed, and that if you want to see real heroism, on screen, watch that show.
I think that's another good point too. The idea of like, just there's inauthentic. I feel like there's inauthentic moral dilemmas that are like we all have to have moral dilemmas in a story, but sometimes it's just like, or sometimes it's and to be fair, sometimes some Christian movies are like cringeworthy. We're like, no. But so I feel like there's like these extremes. And one thing I love back to Top Gun that's good is a little spoiler alert in that. He's, at the core of the movie is one of the pilots that he has to train for this potential mission is the son of, his former wingman or his co-pilot rather, Goose, who dies in the original movie. And that whole like, he's kind of a father figure, but Goose's son isn't interested. He doesn't necessarily blame him for his dad's death, but he doesn't want to be in his shadow. Like all that's there. Right. And it's so brilliant because he knows he has this challenge where all this painful emotional drama, but it's I just lost his name. You'd know the actor. He's so good. Miles Teller. Teller plays Rooster, Goose's son, and their back and forth is it's perfect, And Teller's character, like he's very confident in himself. He's a pretty accomplished pilot, but he's not ready. He's not good enough for it. And Tom Cruise is like Maverick knows that. But there's the whole like, so then the a little bit of a spoiler, but like you come to find out that he has done some things in his sort of, he has done some things previously, pulling rank a little bit to sort of slow down Rooster's career progression.
Oh.
So that has created this animosity, but he did it because he knew he wasn't ready yet. And he made this tough call where it's like, should he have done it? Shouldn't he have done it? He's like, he's not, so maybe he saved his life. Because in saving his life, it's like he's trying to save his dad's life because he couldn't, and it's just so oh my gosh, it's so well done, And so you have that, you have a complicated character. So Tom Cruise's character from beginning to end, like he's far from perfect. One of my favorite at the very beginning, you see this like the things that we struggle with, the things we keep going to confession for.
Oh yeah,
all these years later, so to speak. He's up there. He's testing a new like supersonic jet, and it's day of like they want to shut the program down. It's such a great opener to the movie, and he's only supposed without authorization, like the general. It's Ed Harris. It was great. Ed Harris is coming to shut the program down, and as he's arriving, Tom Cruise takes off without permission, like to do the test, right? To show that we can do this. We can reach it's like we can reach Mach 10 in this jet. And so sure enough, Ed Helms comes in, he's mad, but like, okay, let's see what happens. And he hits Mach 10, and they'd given him the speech before. His right-hand man, Tom Cruise, is like, just hit Mach 10, come home. He's all right. So he hits Mach 10, and it's like, hey, they're cheering. And he's there, and he's flying, and he's like, I wonder. And you see like his friend back in the, in command is like, oh, damn it, don't do it. And he's like, just a little bit more. And he just like Mach 10.1. 10.2. Like he can't help himself. Like
push
he
the
has
envelope.
to see, right, like how fast can I go? And of course it results in disaster and they get in trouble. But that little thing of like, okay, sure, you're 40, you're 50, you're 60.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still the same, I still have some of the struggles I had when I was 15 or 20. But I just felt like that movie did that so well without completely undermining his character.
Right.
You don't have to go all the way back to ground zero, like to build. Like it's an up and down, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that's hard to write.
Life. It is.
It's got to be hard to write.
Oh my gosh, it's hard to write. It's easier to write, and you see this in all kinds of thrillers and stuff. The hero who doesn't grow at all,
right?
Who's the same at book
always
20,
the same.
that is the same in book 20 that he is in book 1. Like. And there's a reason for that. People like, those kind of comfort food stories like that. And
is there someone that you enjoy like that, kind of? Or I'm trying to think of someone.
Sherlock Holmes is a little like that.
Yeah, I guess.
And like these are more the kind of stories I used to read when I was a teenager. Mm-hmm. I can't really, and I guess they were so forgettable, I can't really name them off the top of my head.
Not exactly heroes, but like beloved characters. Like, isn't that a little bit like sitcom stuff? Like Seinfeld season 8 is not like he hasn't grown.
Right.
Since season 1. It's kind of like, okay, that's what we do,
Right. Yeah. And it's
something like that.
Whereas like, I like as an older, person now, pushing 40 here, it's like, mm-hmm. I like those characters who grow and change. I think, and honestly, I don't know much about the later sort of CW like DC universe, but when I checked out is when there was this one season of The Flash where he had this tremendous character progression, and then he throws it all away to go back in time and change the past, even though he had made peace with it, and then. Then throws it all away, and I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
I'm like, and he had done this before. He had tried changing the past before. And my problem with Barry, at least in the seasons I had seen, was that he makes the same mistakes over and over again and never learns anything from them.
Yeah,
and I get
for better or for worse.
For worse,
and
I get that there are people
and that's
like
not life.
Yeah, I get that there are some people like that in real life, but it's like, that's not what I want from like the protagonist of my superhero show.
Right? Well, it's funny. I'm so glad you brought that up because for me, that's Thor. And so because for me, so like I loved like so when Thor came out, was it 2011?
Yeah,
Kenneth Branagh, that was so well done. Like Branagh's an amazing director.
Good movie.
And that was one of my favorite Marvel movies, and his character development in just that movie was really well done. It's one of my favorite Marvel movies. And then the sequel got pretty ripped, Dark World, like it didn't really do it for me. But I don't really think it he kind of kept moving along at least.
Yeah, I liked it when it came out. I haven't seen it since,
And then we had he shows up in Avengers and has an important role to play in that. They kind of move the ball along. I'm doing all this from memory. Then I think it was Ragnarok, and Ragnarok started. It was fun, but that's where I started to like. And it was like kind of goofy. Like there was always humor, but then it was like Taika, again, like I loved it when it came out, but the more time goes on, I'm like, this is a totally different kind of movie. It's like borderline parody in some ways.
Yeah, the best description I heard of some of the jokes in that movie was like, and this is a little crass, but like breaking wind at a funeral.
Yeah, right.
Was like, like, well, like when Asgard gets destroyed, and then they make a joke. And I'm like,
they kept that up. Right? Because then somebody brought up my wife and I. Then when we went to see Thor: Love and Thunder. And like,
I
Natalie
didn't see
Portman's
it.
like making like, cancer jokes, and we're like, oh, like it's like, well,
That's
no, but her character
unpleasant.
has cancer. I'm like, she doesn't, like there's, I don't know, there's something, and it was just I think for me, I think they brought it back a little bit. I think they were getting somewhere with him, and clearly, in my opinion, in Infinity War, they're building him up to be the one who's he's gonna take out Thanos, like the peak of Thor, and it doesn't work, and it's that big dramatic like cliffhanger, and you're shocked, like, okay, but then right, like we
Yeah.
bring him back in Endgame. 5 years have passed, and he's completely dejected. He's just drinking beer. He's playing video games. He's a bro. And I just feel like we never got him back, really. And he that's where I said earlier, kind of regression. The idea of like,
yeah.
Or like, he's achieved, he has built up to being worthy of the throne of Asgard, and then it's like, nah, Valkyrie, you do it. Because they want to have, at least to some degree, right? The studio, whoever wants to have her be king, which makes no sense, which is also a mockery of queenship, which is really important too.
Yeah, which is also
anyway,
a thing. Yeah,
it's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it's
right?
a whole other episode. Yeah,
but yeah, I feel like it just got so bizarre, and I love Chris Hemsworth. Like, I feel like he's an actor. He's trying to do what he's handed. I mean, as best he can. But his character really is disappointed. Or his arc. It just seems so meaninless.
As soon as him and those others were like playing Fortnite and stuff,
right?
I'm like,
that's it.
Nope. I'm like, yeah.
He tries to get serious in that scene. When Hulk says, Thanos is like, I killed that guy. Like, nope, you can't. No, you're just playing Fortnite. There's no way back from that.
Right. Yeah.
But it's the thing is, and anybody could come in and say, okay, hotshot, you do better. Like, I'm not trying to.
Right. Yeah. I am
Monday
very aware of my
it's complicated.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm very aware of my own limitations as a writer. And it's easier to critique than make yourself. But it's like,
yeah.
But I agree with the thrust of your argument here, in the sense that, like, yeah, it's like there's this trend to devalue, the traditional ideal of heroism, the traditional ideals of paternity and fatherhood and things like that, and I just and for valid reasons, there have been people who have been hurt by fathers, and I think that is and by father figures, and
including Absalom.
Yeah,
because David wasn't the best father, right?
And by institutions headed by father figures, and so I feel that is part of the real world reason that's driving this trend. But I think that the way that's being expressed in art is not going to heal these wounds.
No, let me ask you this, Thomas, because this makes me think too. Again, in charity, right? Like, where Catholics are called to charity no matter what. I have it on. Who knows? I'm no insider whatsoever, but I feel like I have good reason to believe this story that I heard. In terms of where I heard it from, it was just online, but like it seemed to track. No, I wouldn't be surprised. I'll put it that way. That you get to the build up to the end of this season 2 of Mandalorian, which Mando Din Djarin is another one that I think has been done so well.
Yes,
right, with this flawed character, but who's a father figure. And the big build up to him sending baby Grogu off with Luke. This perfect kind of bow on the end of season 2. And what I heard was that was what they wanted, and they had some other ideas for where the show would go from there. But that somebody at Disney, it's like, you did what with the little green guy? He's like, well, he went off to study with Luke Skywalker. Because Luke who, whatever, I don't care. Bring him back. Because and again, like, I don't know, but to me it would make sense, if that is what happened. What do you think about that, at least in principle, that challenge we have with modern storytelling so much being in this kind of, corporation thing where there's a big, marketing plan and all this, where you can actually have executives come in and say, no, this is what happens or you're fired. Like, that's, talk about a bad father figure, right? Someone in a
Yeah.
leadership role like that, forcing you to, yeah, that's got to be a mess too, potentially.
And it leads the drive that I see today among among people to say, like, indie or bust. Like, they're only going to consume
Right. Yeah.
independently created media. They're not going to
Yeah.
support corporate media. And I understand this. I get a little bit peeved when they go after people who still enjoy
Right.
corporate created media. I'm
Like,
like,
you
come,
have to be with us or you're a
yeah, you
traitor. Like,
have to be with
okay.
us in indie and or
Yeah.
nothing. And I'm like, okay, I'm like, there's a little bit of nuance here. But yeah,
Right. Sure.
I just, yeah, I think that the people at the top there are not really interested in telling good stories. They are interested in making money and selling toy baby Yodas. And
And
so
to be fair, everybody, I'm not, call me a hypocrite. I am, you can't see it. I am surrounded in this room by, like, I've
yeah.
paid Disney so much money. Yeah, so don't, fair enough.
Never mind that they could have had an awesome show of Luke Skywalker and
Yeah.
Grogu doing stuff, but like you
Right.
said, it's like
There's
they
time. There's time. Yeah. This is what was going on in those other episodes. Yeah. No.
yeah, but it yeah, I think that in some ways we don't even know how to tell stories anymore because I don't know. I was going to go in a direction that I think was too political, but it's like it's just that, like, even in some cases you see the very foundations of of storytelling that we take for granted, like, undermined as, like,
Right.
oh well, that is invented by, I don't know, insert your group of oppressors here. It's
Yes.
like,
Right. Yeah.
so yeah, I just think that we, and there are tons of ways to tell stories, but I think that in our current environment, there's there and with a new generation of storytellers coming up through this kind of corporate environment, I think that and who have not been exposed to perhaps not been exposed to the quote unquote great books or good literature
Mm-hmm.
from all over the world, and like filling your imagination with the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Yeah.
If you're not doing that, you're not going to, what comes out of you is not going to be good stories.
Which is an unexpected little opportunity for me to pitch that people look into the classical education revival that's happening all over the
Yes.
place, because truly, like,
Yes.
it's fascinating to me that there's a growing,
Hmm.
it's small, but there's a rapidly I should say, growing
Yes.
number of teenagers who are
Hmm.
reading Dante and
Yep.
Aeschylus and
I
Cervantes,
went
and
to a classical high
it's,
school.
did
Yep.
you? Okay, yeah.
Yep. I
Well, but
read my
when you
humanities
did,
teacher.
there's way more people now than even when you went. Yeah.
Yeah, and my humanities teacher changed my life.
Yeah.
He introduced me to Homer. He
Right.
introduced me to I'd read Shakespeare before, but not in the way he had us read him. And like,
Well, that's again well, Chesterton said something like, we read we read the Iliad because life is a battle. We read the Odyssey because life is a journey.
journey,
These kinds of things. We read the Book of Job because life is
suffering.
filled with
Yeah.
suffering, right? That idea of, like, these perennial things, and I think that flies in the face. That's a whole other episode. But
Hmm.
the more sort of progressive, postmodern, kind of attitude of the true reality is that everything is just progressing all the time, and that if it's new, it's worthwhile. If it's old, just discard it.
Right.
Do that to your own peril.
Hmm. Yeah.
People 600 years ago were struggling with exactly the same things you are. It just looked a little different. And when you
Right. Yeah.
see that
Hmm.
in literature, like, you don't feel so alone. You know?
Exactly. And in literature from all over the world, because I know there's people who's going to say, oh, well, that's just like
Yes.
Eurocentric stuff. It's like,
Not at
no,
all.
read myths from all over the world. Read great books from all over the world.
Right.
Bringing it back to the beginning with Ray Bradbury, he used to say, cram your head full of this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a storyteller, cram your head with
Yeah.
poems, books, essays, all this stuff that's gonna bounce around in your head and come out as good stories, and not cheaply corporate sameness over and over again.
Right. Oh my gosh. Well, Thomas, I think that's
Yeah.
probably a good place to put a bow on it for now. It's never the end. It's just sort of
Nope.
a little pause until we catch our breath and go deeper. But anything you want to share with anybody, like resources to check out? I mean, I'll have links and stuff below in the show notes. But anything you want to share, that you're working on, or you want people to pray for as well,
Yes. I can't share the title right now. But my first children's book, which is a biography of Blessed Nicholas Steno, who was a priest and early geologist, will be coming out hopefully in February of 2025 with Word on Fire Votive. That's their children's imprint. And you can always keep up with that and all of my other works in progress at my Substack, which is called Page Turning, that you can find at thomasjsalerno.substack.com.
Nice. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. As always, we'll have you back for sure.
Thank you, Mike. This was a great discussion.
Yeah, take care.
You too.
I told Thomas in the lead up to this interview that it was just something that's been in the back of my mind, and it kept coming up. I was like jotting notes down, and what it started off as was kind of like a rant of things I was angry about or things I wasn't satisfied by in some of these movies we mentioned. But I knew, I had this sense that it would go somewhere helpful and positive if I talked to Thomas about it. And so we went into that without much of an outline, and I was really happy with how it turned out. I think there was a couple really good takeaways to consider from that discussion. So hopefully you got the same sort of vibe from that. I really will encourage you to share this far and wide, and to return to the Gracious Guest Show for a future episode. Stay tuned, and as always, don't forget to wonder. Take care.